Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Forbes contributor Ginny Hogan. Ginny, thanks for
Hi,
coming on.
thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you today. The Writers Guild of America is on strike for the first time in 15 years as of this week. So before we get into the implications, the ramifications, can you break down why this is happening?
Sure. So there have been a lot of changes since the rise of streamers that have created conditions for writers that are less fair than they were before, and they're not being compensated in the ways that they were before. So with the rise of streamers, a lot of television shows run for fewer weeks, which means they employ writers for less time. There are a lot more one-season shows, and so it becomes harder for writers to make a living, and it becomes harder for them to get health care. And they have asked the studios for higher compensation and for ending practices that prevent writers from working more weeks of the year. And there are also some parts of the that the Writers Guild is unhappy about that are related to artificial intelligence, which is really interesting. And I think it's or part of the demands of the WGA right now are related to artificial intelligence and to limits on how much AI can be used to write television shows. I don't think that there has been an enormous amount of that done thus far. I think that is like a forward-looking request. They're anticipating that studios are going to be trying to replace writers with AI, and they're trying to get ahead of it. So basically, the writer's strike has been a result of a number of brewing issues and an inability to come to an agreement about how to more fairly compensate writers as streamers have risen in prominence.
That's really interesting that they are including AI in part of their demands. You and I, the last conversation we had was actually on AI. Do you think that artificial intelligence could replace a writer?
I don't think it would be as good as a writer. I think that there is a chance that it will replace writers, basically. So I think that there's like you can actually ask ChatGPT to write fiction. I've asked it to say like write me a story about this or that. I've never found them to be really good stories. I'm impressed that they write stories at all. I know that AI is improving in quality. But I think that one of the concerns that the Writers Guild has is that in order to train AI to write television shows, and I don't think this is an extremely imminent concern, but I think it's, well, who knows what we'll think in a year, because I know there's an AI that's hosting a podcast, there's AI generated art, there's all kinds of AI is creating content and art right now. So I think that one of the concerns that the WGA has is that to train an AI to write a television show, you would be teaching it on existing scripts of the TV shows. So whoever wrote those shows would definitely need to be compensated for what the AI was learning from. That said, I don't think that solves the whole problem, because the studios might try to make that a one-time payment. They pay for the rights to train the AI on TV shows, and then the writers never get compensated for those shows again. So I think it is a much broader question of to what extent, like, do we want to let AI replace jobs, basically?
That's really smart for them to be looking so far into the future, because the last time they went on strike 15 years ago, streamers had nowhere near the prominence, or if not at all, that they do right now. So it's important to be looking ahead in that regard. But what does this all mean for us as content consumers? What shows does this affect? How does this affect us as an audience member?
Totally. So there are some shows that have already gone dark. A lot of the late night shows, like you can't watch Jimmy Fallon or Seth Meyers, and I think that a lot of those hosts came on Monday or probably Tuesday to express their support for the strike and say that they're not going to be able to air their shows because their writers aren't working right now. So it's definitely already affected shows. And then there's the question of the fall lineup. So television today doesn't work on quite as strict of a schedule as it used to, where it was like every network had like their big fall lineup. But that being said, there are still a bunch of new scripted shows that are supposed to come out in the next several months. And if they don't have writers to write them, then they might be at risk of not coming out. So I think that, you'll see something like Succession is going to continue coming out, but that show has already been written. So I think that there's a little bit of a lag in terms of, it takes a while to produce a television show. So just because you see new scripted shows coming out in the next couple weeks doesn't mean that the strike has been resolved. But I think that there's sort of a broader issue about almost like the future of television is at stake, I would say, because what a lot of studios and networks have done is bulk up on reality TV shows in like anticipation of a strike, because they think that that's I mean, you don't need writers for reality TV shows. That's sort of the premise of them. And you and so they're going to be putting those shows out instead. And I'm nervous that I don't know how I don't have like numbers on how what different shows perform well or something, but I am nervous that television will just change as a medium and they'll decide that this is like a better type of television to put out, and maybe it's not as, maybe the ratings aren't as good, but the costs are lower, or it's the only thing that they were able to put out for 6 months, so they stick to it. So I am very nervous. I do feel like that really the future of television is at stake with this strike, and there is this question of like, there are a lot of different ways to make television. You can make reality television. You can probably in the next year make AI generated television. You can have talk shows. You can have all kinds of things. But I think that like high quality scripted shows, in my opinion, they're just, there's nothing like them. They're incomparable in their quality. And so if the television industry does not continue to invest in writers, then I think that it is a medium that I think is going to be changing for the worst if they don't decide to work with the WGA to meet the demands of writers.
I mean, really, to your point, when I think of looking back at shows that have stuck with me, shows where I saw myself, shows that, you know, you are talking to your friends, you're going on Twitter, you're seeing like updates, it's all scripted shows that have stuck with me. But you wrote a really interesting piece for Forbes about how high quality scripted television is critical for your mental health. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, so I think that the what was most interesting to the about that piece for me, so there were a few things once I started talking to people about the effects it had, there were a few things that I would have guessed right away. One of which is like it gives your mind a break and it's an escape. So reality television I find very stressful because even though I know that the scenarios aren't quite real, I still don't I'm still watching real people be themselves. And so when they're in pain, it can be very painful. I feel like I'm still in the real world. And so, and then obviously watching the news, like absolutely not an escape. That's like
The opposite.
Like, that actually is what's happening in the real world. So scripted shows provide this escape that other types of television don't. And then, but what I think is bigger is the idea of like seeing yourself represented on screen. And for that, what you need is like, in order for that to be an uplifting experience, you need like a fictional character who can have like a, maybe not necessarily a happy ending, but like a satisfying ending. So like a character who's struggling, like there were people who wrote about the different mental illnesses that they had, like someone who struggled with autism, someone who was in CBT therapy. He didn't say what mental illness he had, but people who said that they'd seen characters go through the same type of therapies or struggle with the same issues on screen and watch those characters succeed and kind of get the life they want. They recognize that there's a writer who, all of those characters start with a writer or with the creator of the show who wants to bring the character to life. And there's a lot more to it than that. Of course, there's the actor, there's the director, and you know, how they portray the character on stage. But it begins with a writer who wants this character to be a real person and to be represented on screen with flaws and with a lot of positive traits and with just like a lot of depth to the character. So someone who might feel like they haven't been fully seen in their real life can really be seen in scripted television in a way that I don't think is true of other types of television.
I think that depth is really important. When I look back at my favorite characters of my favorite TV shows, they weren't these perfect, flawless characters. And that really, as you said, starts with the writer, which is so, so important. So what do you think would be lost without scripted TV, especially for the audience and their mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like such a, I feel like I couldn't even articulate what all would be lost. And I don't think that scripted television is going away in any permanent way, but I do think like the ability of a writer to make a living is going to affect what kind of stories we get to hear. So we're going to have a much more limited perspective on in scripted television if the studios are not willing to work with the WGA. So I think that what we would lose is people's like chance to kind of process their lives through stories that also like almost process and escape their lives at the same time. I think that that's such a powerful thing about television. And I'm not saying that television is all good. I know that people, you know, struggle with being addicted to television or they rely on television when they're depressed instead of going out into the real world. But I do think it's like a very powerful tool for a lot of people. I think that that it really, and it also brings just like so much joy. Like I say I rely on it for my mental health, but even times when my mental health is good, I just look forward to it because it's so fun to sink into it, and it can be a very social experience. Like watching shows with your friends. I watch Game of Thrones like every week. We had a watch party with my friends. So I think that that sense of like community and just that kind of like it's a very simple joy, which I did write about in my article. Like you do have to pay for Netflix, but you don't. It's not cost prohibitive in the way that going on a vacation is. It's not cost prohibitive in the way that going to a concert is. Like it's all, you don't need a lot of energy. You can have a really 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 busy day and then have your one break at the end of the day is like an episode of television, and I think that yeah, I just think that that would be a huge loss for people to not have that. And I don't think that we're at risk of there being no scripted television, but I think that the depth of scripted television is at risk if we don't make it possible for writers to make a livable wage. Because what would happen otherwise is that we would have writers who aren't relying on their jobs for their finances, so people are independently wealthy or maybe are working other jobs, which would be, you know, compromising their ability to write as much as they would otherwise. So I think it's very important to have writers in Hollywood making a living wage.
I mean, the demand is pretty feasible from what you're saying. A writer making a livable wage. Are studios coming to the table? Do we know, like, where are we in terms of negotiations? We know the writers are on the picket lines, but what's next?
So I really don't know exactly where they are in terms of negotiations. I've heard estimates that it's going to last 6 months. I've heard other people have much more optimistic estimates. I do know that I did see like a statistic that what writers are asking for is going to cost studios like under $500 million a year. And the loss that these studios have already incurred or the loss in value is like $2 billion for Netflix, 2 billion for Hulu. That's an approximation, but it's something much more than what the writers are asking. So I think that I do think that the demands are not, even though I understand that studios have their own financial difficulties and that, you know, the changing attention, you know, the American consumer or television viewers may be turning their attention to other mediums, and that presents challenges for studios. But I don't think that these costs are an impossibility for studios to pay. So I'm hopeful that I don't know. I'm hopeful, but I don't have a sense of the timeline at all.
Ginny Hogan, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.